What do you get when Jesus starts glowing like the sun, Moses and Elijah appear out of nowhere, and Peter decides to speak mid-miracle? You get Matthew chapter 17, a mountaintop experience that leaves even the disciples speechless. Well, except Peter. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm David. Welcome back to The Late Disciple, where we explore Scripture with curiosity, honesty, and maybe the occasional snark. Today, we're looking at one of the most dazzling chapters in the Gospels, Matthew 17. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain, and suddenly he is transfigured before them. His face shines like the sun, and his clothes become as white as light. And then Moses and Elijah appear, talking with Jesus. This is absolutely incredible. Moses represents the law, Elijah the prophets. Jesus is literally standing between the old covenant and the new. But Peter, in classic Peter fashion, blurts out, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. I'll build 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Now, your first thought might be, good on you, Peter. You're trying to be helpful. But he's not being helpful. In fact, this is the equivalent of a child interrupting an important conversation among adults. And this is why God himself now appears, and while Peter is still speaking, basically tells him to shut up and listen. Specifically, he says, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him!" Exclamation point. And if there's any question that this was a rebuke, all 3 of the disciples fall face down on the ground in fear. But Jesus touches them and says, "Get up. Don't be afraid." And when they do look up, Moses and Elijah are gone. Only Jesus remains. So, Peter, you won't have to build those shelters after all. Here's a couple of things to consider in this telling of Jesus' transfiguration. First, it's been suggested by some scholars that not only is Peter improperly interrupting this conversation between Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, but by offering to build shelters for the 3 of them, he's suggesting that Moses and Elijah are equal to Jesus. Moses and Elijah were indeed esteemed figures and great men, but they were still just men. Jesus was a perfect and sinless Son of God, which Peter himself recently confessed. So yeah, that was 2 facepalm moments there for Peter. Second, we recently discussed the miracle of Jesus walking on the water, and in that story, the disciples were struggling against rough waters at night in their boat. Have you ever wondered how they even saw Jesus in the distance under those circumstances? Well, this radiant brilliance on display during his transfiguration might be a clue. If Jesus were in his transfigured state while walking across the lake, spotting him at sea in a storm at night might not be as hard as it sounds. Credit to my pastor for this observation. Thanks, Keith. The disciples have just had a front row seat to divine glory. But on the way back down the mountain, Jesus warns them not to tell anyone about what they witnessed, yet. That is, not until after his resurrection. Why? Well, once again, by prematurely revealing the true nature and power of Jesus, this could have inadvertently fueled a political revolution by those who were expecting a warrior king Messiah. The disciples then ask, why did the teachers say Elijah must come first? And Jesus replies, Elijah has already come, and they didn't recognize him. He's referring to John the Baptist. Now, because I'm early in my journey with the Bible, and because I started with the Gospels, I didn't know who Elijah was when reading his name. So, who was Elijah? He was a bold prophet in the Old Testament who stood up to kings, called down fire, and never died. That's right, he never died. He was taken up to heaven in a chariot. Malachi prophesied that Elijah would return before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. John the Baptist wasn't literally Elijah, but he came in the spirit and power of Elijah, as Jesus confirms. As for whether John knew he was Elijah, that's debatable. When asked, he himself said, "I am not Elijah." So perhaps John didn't see it in himself, but Jesus did. Back down the mountain, they encounter a distressed father whose son is suffering from seizures. The disciples had tried to heal him but failed. Jesus sounds annoyed. He says, "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you?" Did I say annoyed? Because this sounds like he was PO'd. Was Jesus talking to the crowd or the disciples? Maybe both, but for me, it sounds like he's upset with the disciples. He clearly expected better at this point. The disciples had already been given authority to heal. Their failure wasn't due to lack of instruction, it was lack of faith. Then Jesus heals the boy instantly, of course, and the disciples ask why they couldn't do it. "Because you have so little faith." Then, in one of his most quoted lines, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move,' and it will move." Did Jesus just contradict himself? No, but it does seem this way on the surface. The issue isn't the size of their faith, but its absence. Even a speck of genuine trust in God is powerful. The disciples weren't working from trust. They were likely trying to force results by method instead of by faith. Later, while traveling, Jesus again predicts his betrayal, death, and resurrection while speaking with the disciples. The disciples are filled with grief. It's easy to forget how jarring this must have been for them. They've seen miracles, heard crowds call Jesus the Messiah, and now he's talking about dying. Their preconception of the Messiah as a conquering king is clashing hard against the reality of Jesus' real mission. When they reach Capernaum, tax collectors ask Peter whether Jesus pays the temple tax. Peter says yes. Later, Jesus brings it up with him. "From whom do kings collect taxes? From their children or from others?" Peter says, "From others." Jesus then replies, "Then the children are exempt." Translation: Jesus is the Son of God. The temple is his Father's house. He doesn't owe a temple tax. But to avoid conflict, at least this time, Jesus tells Peter to go fishing. He says, "Throw out your line. The first fish you catch will have a 4 drachma coin." Enough to cover the tax for both of them. Of all the miracles, this might be the most low-key wild one. Today, this would sound like a suspicious internet ad like, "One weird way to make money fast." I mean, Jesus could have pulled a coin from anywhere, but he uses a fish. Why? It's humble, it's unexpected, and it confirms his dominion over nature and provision. But if you ever find yourself fishing for tax money, maybe taking this too literally won't pay off today. Also, I don't think the IRS takes drachma. Matthew 17 is a bit all over the place. Glory on the mountaintop as Jesus is bathed in dazzling light, followed by extreme frustration with his disciples and their lack of faith. All the way to a fish with a coin in its mouth. I guess you could say it has something for everyone? But through it all, Jesus is patient, mostly, purposeful, preparing them and us for what's to come. In our next video, we'll step into Matthew 18, where Jesus teaches us how to handle conflict and reminds us why humility and forgiveness matter so much in his kingdom. If this video encouraged you, drop a like, leave a comment, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's next. And as always, remember, we are all disciples. It is never too late.